Hello friends, and welcome to my May wrap-up. In the month of May, I read 9 books, and we're just gonna talk our way through them. It is 10 p.m. and I am recording this in my closet. So we're just gonna be cozy together, you know? Super chill, we're just gonna hang out and sit and talk about these books. And then we're gonna go to bed, and it'll all be fine. And that's what I'm gonna keep telling myself. The first book that I read this month, which I can't believe that this was just a month ago, I feel like I read this forever ago. I read it on the 1st of May, and it is My Neighbor Totoro by Those Are the Three People That Made It. I'm sure most of us know what this story is. You're following these two sisters, they're moving into a new house, and there's just some magic that's going on. They meet this sweet little boy. Very much not little, but genuinely I don't even think I could explain this story. It's just such a feel-good, very much a nostalgia story to me because we watched this I don't even know how long ago. It's always fun to revisit. And also a big focus of this book is May. That's one of the characters' names, but it's also just the season that they're in. It's very much a springtime book, so it was just the most fitting time to read it. It was a perfectly clear sky, it was like 70 degrees, and it felt really good to just sit and read through this whole thing. I read it in pretty much one sitting over the course of 3 hours, and it just filled me with warm feelings, and that's all I have to say about it. I'm just sitting here with this whole stack in my lap for no reason. This is my comfort item, it's just this stack of books. The second book that I read this month was Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier. This is the same author as Rebecca, which I've heard a lot of good things about, but I haven't read yet. It's a collection of scary short stories, and I did want to save it for spooky season. I bought it around that time last year, and since I didn't get around to it, I wanted to save it. But in April, I was reading a lot of spooky stories, and I wanted to see if this would be good because I saw Jack Edwards talking highly, and I wanted to give it a try, and I thought it was just okay. I think I'm definitely into more psychological thrillers, and this one, it's different. It's scary in a subtle way. It's a collection of short stories, and for most of them, it's like just something is off. Like nothing is obviously wrong for a lot of them, but something is just slightly uncomfortable. So it's the type of story that will maybe stick with you, but not one that you'll think of, if that makes sense. Like if you are in a situation that is similar to these characters, you will probably be reminded of the stories, but organically you probably won't think about them. I think the most memorable one is probably The Birds. It's a story where the birds, just every bird in the world essentially, is out for blood, and people just have to hide away because the birds are gonna get them. And for like a week after, anytime I saw a bird in public, I was like, oh, this is it for me. But I also like the story Blue Lenses, in which a woman is blind and she gets these lenses that are gonna allow her to see again, and once she opens her eyes, everybody has animal heads, which very much reminded me of Doctor Who with all the cat ladies. And then also the very last story in this is about a village in the mountains where people just go and they disappear and they never get seen again. I think those 3 were my favorites out of this, but overall it wasn't super memorable. It's not something I will ever really think of unless I'm actively looking at it. I think a lot of the stories are boring or predictable, which could just be because this is an older book, so maybe they hadn't been so overused. Like maybe when these stories came out they were cool and interesting, but now I've seen so many of these things before that they just weren't that shocking to me. So I do think the concepts are interesting, I just think now they're overdone. The third book that I read this month, which I've talked about it a couple times last month in April. At the very start of that month, I was reading Maddie Healy's favorite books, which also, I don't know if I've said it in a video yet, but thank you so much for all of the support on that Maddie and Taylor video. From the start of research to final posting, it took me roughly 48 hours, so I really just put everything that I had into that video because it was something that was interesting and I knew that it would probably get good engagement, and it's always fun to see your hard work actually paying off. And I really appreciate how kind and supportive everybody is in the comments of that. But yes, I was reading Maddie Healy's favorite books, one of which, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I started for that video, but then I got so bored that I put it down and I just couldn't get back into it. And this month I decided I need to wrap up a lot of the books that I'm sitting in the middle of. So I did that by any means, you know? I was putting on audiobooks while I was doing dishes just so I could at least say that I was making progress. It definitely captures the idea of some guy who's just traveling in a lifestyle of not caring, which is very much what this book is supposed to be about. It's about this whole generation that just didn't really care about expectations and they were just going and having fun and doing whatever they wanted. And this does capture that, but oh wow, he doesn't do anything else. The characters are pretty forgettable, the plot is pretty forgettable because there isn't really one. It's just, hey, we're in this state, let's go across the country, now let's go back, now let's go back. No, it doesn't really go anywhere. It's based on a true story, it's based on the author's life, but it didn't keep me interested at all because nothing really happened, and also he's so privileged. He is this white man, so already you have this privilege, but he just seems very lucky in all of his circumstances. There was never a point where something bad happened where it's gonna be bad. There would be bad things that happen and they're just like, well, and then they move on, which again is kind of the point. This whole idea of not caring, but at the same time, I didn't care about the character because it doesn't seem like anything in his life matters. I wrote down that it is a very privileged experience that's being written about here. There was a point where he wished to be a person of color. I don't exactly remember the context, but it's something I've heard people say before where they're like, I'm bored of being white. I wish I could be a person of color for the culture or for the experience or just to spice things up a little, which I understand the idea. It is so privileged to be able to even say that, to even consider that, because to say that you wish you were a person of color, to wish you were a minority just for fun, it completely takes away from all the hardship that that group has. I wrote bad things that happen in this book are a result of his lack of care, so you don't really feel bad about it. Anything that happens is kind of just because he didn't think about it. So it's like, too bad for him. I don't really care to see what happens, but I did make it through this whole book because I needed to. For my own satisfaction, I had to finish. It technically did do what it came to do, but in an uninteresting and largely offensive way. And I did have to kind of zone out and put the audiobook on just to get through it. I do still appreciate the cultural relevance that this book has. I'm happy that I read it and that I know that it exists, but I will never desire reading it again. This next book is possibly my first full, proper 5-star read of the year. I've had a lot of 4-point somethings, but this is the first one where I just felt so genuinely positive about my experience while reading it. And it is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I bought it purely for the cover because Barnes & Noble has these really cool edges, which I'm sure it'll frustrate people that I haven't taken these stickers off, but I don't know. For some reason, I'm okay with this one. I went into it not knowing anything. I've heard so much about House on the Cerulean Sea, but I haven't really seen anybody talking about this book. It's about this grumpy old man. He's taking work way too seriously. He's mean, he's strict, he's cruel to his employees. It's the whole stereotypical grumpy old man thing. He's at the top of his business, but socially, he's just not doing well at all. The first chapter does really good at establishing why you shouldn't like him. You see how he just genuinely doesn't care about anybody, but it still draws you into why you should care about the story as a whole. You see that he's a bad person, but from the beginning, you know that it's kind of gonna be about his redemption. This does have a little bit of conversation about some darker topics like the big unalive, so if you're not comfortable reading that, then maybe don't read this. And I really appreciate that the author put a content warning at the start of this book for that. It's really appreciated. It says, the story explores life and love as well as loss and grief. There are discussions of death in different forms. Please read with care. And I think that is just so kind and so thoughtful, and I really appreciate the author for putting that in there. But even with those darker topics, the story itself was still lighthearted, it was still silly, so it really balanced out. I wrote down that the characters are engaging and the story is immersive, cozy, atmospheric, and silly. So you're following this man, he's super serious, he's super into his work, he wants to seem like he's the big authority, and then he dies. And this story is following him in the time in between life and death, where he meets this group of people who are gonna basically help him come to terms with that. He comes to this tea house, and he's just sitting there living it up with them until he's ready to move on. And while he's there, it is kind of this big redemption thing of him realizing that maybe he could have been a little bit nicer and he could have enjoyed life a little bit more. This whole book is just a reminder to enjoy the little things in life and to not take everything so seriously. And it was really fun to read because I worked 12 days in a row. The start of this month, I was working non-stop, and it was really nice to come home and to be able to read this and to remember that work isn't everything, and it's okay to just live life. I really appreciate that the story features an older queer couple. The two main characters are both older men that are attracted to each other, and it's just so sweet, and you're rooting for them so much, and it hurts your heart so bad to see that they can't be together because one of them is a ghost. And I think it is done so beautifully, and I was so much more excited to learn after reading this book. I saw that the author is asexual, and he's talked about how that plays a part in writing these romances, and I really just loved it so much because the relationship isn't sexual. It's entirely emotional, and it felt so good and so genuine. It was just such a comforting read, even if the themes are so dark. The characters handle it in such a comforting way, and I 100% would have cried at the ending if I wasn't out of the house at the time. My one and only complaint: please stop using cerulean as a descriptor. Every time that came up, I would just think about the other book, which made me wonder, are these in the same universe? Because there are mentions of pictures with a house on a cliffside. They're two completely separate stories, but because that same image was mentioned, it just got me wondering. The 5th book that I read this month, again, I was just trying to wrap up some things from April, so I finished In Cold Blood. This was another one of Maddie's favorite authors. I don't know that this was necessarily a favorite book, but it is what his Instagram title is based off off of. This is one of the few non-fictions that I've read this year. It's very much a true crime story. It's about this family of 4, they got shot and killed. So you're following what the town thinks about it, and you're also following from the perspective of the people who did it. And you're seeing what led up to the event, how the event went down, and then what happened after. I like that it takes stories directly from the people who were involved, so either family or neighbors or whoever else, because when you're doing this type of story, you really have to handle it with care, and you have to make sure that everybody involved is okay with you publishing the story for the world to see. People say if you like Criminal Minds, you might like this, which is gonna be true of pretty much any true crime media, just because that is kind of what Criminal Minds is. You just have to be aware that this is a real life story. Criminal Minds, it's based on real stories, but the characters and everything like that is this fictional world. But when you're reading this, these are real people. This is a real thing that happened, especially when you're consuming crime content like Criminal Minds, where it isn't entirely real. It creates this weird disconnect, so while you're consuming this type of media, you just have to remember that these are completely real experiences that actually happen to people, and it's hard to think about stuff like that. The actual story itself is really captivating, and it's really easy to get through, and I like the way that it jumps between perspectives. You're kind of starting small, you're spreading out, and then you focus back in on the actual moment of the crime. And from there, you're following the people that are trying to figure out what happened with the perspective of the people who did the crime. So I like the way that the information is presented. It's just hard to conceptualize that this is all real. The one thing I will say is there was no satisfaction from reading this book. It felt dirty to be reading the confessions. There was no satisfaction with the ending. It just kind of happened. These are real people, and it actually happened, and now the world just goes on. The 6th book I read was a collection of Japanese folktales. Again, this was kind of just something to fill the time. I would read one every couple of days, just to have something so I could feel a little bit productive and feel like I was still moving through books without dedicating my time to an entire book. I don't think I will especially remember any of the stories. Again, it's one of those things where if I see something that reminds me of it, I might think about it, but on my own, this isn't something that's ever really going to come up. Very interesting to see stories from another culture and to see the explanations that they have for different things in nature. But so many of these stories are so cruel towards animals. So many of them are about being little tricksters and then people getting what they deserve, and also about, like, torture. Setting somebody on fire and then rubbing pepper all over it, or taking out all of the bones of a creature and that's why jellyfish look the way that they are. Like, it just made me sad to read because they're so mean to all the animals in this book. Mostly I was just happy and I was very satisfied because I finished this within an hour of finishing In Cold Blood. So I was just really moving through all of the books that I was trying to finish. This next book I don't want to talk too much on just because I am going to post an entire reading vlog on it. That should be going up, I believe, June 2nd. But I read Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This book is about a queer relationship and a cooking competition. It's an open-door queer romance. It could be forced proximity or workplace romance because it is a competition show. They're both contestants. I guess you could say that they're working together, and also for the challenges they are going to be pretty close to each other. I do think the big conflict comes down to miscommunication, which I know is frustrating to a lot of people. And I think their intimate scenes were focused on more than any other part of the story, which was a little bit frustrating and it made me not really care about anything. But I do really appreciate the non-binary representation. London is non-binary, uses they them pronouns, and I really liked the way that it was presented. Because this author is also non-binary with they them pronouns, so it's able to be shown in a really natural way because it was written by somebody who knows how it should sound. Number 8 is just a little novella. It's not even 100 pages. I think it's 65 pages. It is The Deal of a Lifetime by Frederick Bachman. Yes, it is a Christmas book, but we went to the library and they had like 5 or 6 of his books there. And I've read so many good things and I figured I might as well start off with a novella, see what I think about it. This book is very heavy on the conversations about death, and the artwork makes it so much more sad because it's so mundane. This one is just a pencil. Like that looks so sad. Even without any context, it just looks sad. But this is essentially a big letter from a father to a son. The father is pretty distant. He's not very likable. He's famous and he sort of let that get to his head and he doesn't really care about his kid as much as he should have. And now he's kind of coming to terms with that. He meets a little girl and when he sees that she's dying, he essentially begs death and says, "Please take my life instead of hers." I don't want to say much more than that because it's only a short little thing. I don't want to say anything that I shouldn't, but it genuinely filled me with such a heavy feeling. I read it in one sitting in like half an hour. It made me so sad. But it was also so comforting. It was so strange. And the reviews that I saw, I went on Goodreads and I wanted to see the reviews because I know people don't really have much to say about something so short, and so many reviews, all of the 1-star people were saying that the main character is unlikable, which was just so silly to me because that's the entire point. He's supposed to be this unlikable old man who's making this deal of a lifetime, making this decision, and you're sort of seeing his character growth. And I really appreciate the way that you're able to have character growth in something so short. The author made me care about these characters immediately, even though I barely got to spend any time with them. Genuinely, I think this was another favorite of the month. Between this and The Whispering Door, they carved out a place in my chest, and they happily reside there. I feel like I've been talking forever. I'm really invested in talking about these books right now. I was very tired and I was really wanting to go to bed, but once I sit down to talk about these books, I just get so passionate about them. But we've made it onto our last one, which as of right now, I haven't finished. It's currently May 30th. I am hoping to finish it tonight. Again, this is going to be a full reading vlog, so I don't want to go too much into it. But the one thing I will say is it's very, very, very similar to Under the Whispering Door. They are both about older men who work too hard and take life too seriously and don't really know how to have fun. They very much follow the regulations. In this, you're following Linus. He's 40 years old, and he inspects orphanages. He just checks to make sure that the kids are living in good conditions and that they're being treated okay. He just goes, he analyzes, and he leaves. And this book is big on found family. He goes to this house, which is secretive. Nobody really talks about it. People don't really say that it's there, but he shows up and he's there to investigate it for 1 month. And while he's there, he sees that it's not the most conventional family, but it is still a family at the end of the day. It is very similar, very repetitive to the other book, but I think if you're looking for that sort of comforting story and these really silly characters, you just want something that's super low stakes, I think you'll enjoy both of them. If you're there for the vibes are there. The big themes in this are just that you are more than the sum of your parts, and also that perception is colored by what we're taught. Again, haven't quite finished it, can't give a final review. I guess I don't really say my final ratings in any of these videos. If you ever are curious about that, I do always link my Goodreads and story graphs, but those are the 9 books that I read in May. I really felt like I didn't read that much this month, but like I said, I was working every single day for the first 12 days, and then last week we went on vacation, so we weren't home. So I think all things considered, that's still a lot of reading. And then also the most recent reads have been for June, because if you haven't heard yet, for the entire month of June, I'm going to be trying to post every single day focusing on queer authors, and this is the first in what is potentially 30 days of posting nonstop. I guess 31 days because this is going up on May 31st. So for 31 days, I will be posting every single day. If all goes well, I don't know. I'm not gonna force myself. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I talk a little bit more about it in my last video. And also if you would like to recommend any queer authors or stories, you can comment it on that other video because I will be referring to those comments to try and pick some more books. But that's all I have for this month. I'm gonna go because I've been sitting here for an hour and I'm very tired and very thirsty, and I would like to edit this and then go to bed because I have so much video work to do and I gotta go get started. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you guys have read any of these books, let me know what you thought about them. I'm so tired. If you like my face and you want to see more of it, you can subscribe to this channel or my main channel, riverbxnd, where I post music content, or my Instagram, Spotify, Goodreads, and Storygraph. And also my TikTok, because I'm going to try to post some book content on there this month. I'm just going to test it out, see if I like that format at all. But that's all I have for now. So I will see you tomorrow with another video. It's going to be a long month.